I think it's always funny. Usually the people that are really going down on praise and worship players are usually the guys who have like 2 blues licks that they just like, that's all they play. That's their repertoire.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I mean, there's a lot of praise and worship players who know these 3 triads that are literally the base of pretty much every riff written in P&W kind of music, and it's all good, it's all fine. I think praise and worship, I've got a lot of different feelings about praise and worship. I think as a musician, I should clarify. I think on one hand, a lot of churches, I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of churches really prioritize, as you kind of said in the beginning of this, be exactly like the record. I want you to do the part note for note and sound as close as you can to the record. We're not going to accept any of your own individual creativity, your own voice. There's a ton of pressure for you to just basically be an overdub of that person.
Yeah.
And I think that creates a really, it can create, I don't want to speak in too many generalities here, but I think it can create a really just negative culture. And also it just really inhibits your growth as a musician because,
totally.
I'm going back and forth with this because a lot of people, they learn by learning covers of songs, right? So like, I want to stretch myself. I want to learn something new. I'm going to pull up a, classic, Billy Gibbons song or something and learn some of these riffs he does. But I'm choosing a song that's a challenge to me, right? And I'm choosing a song that's got parts that I can grow into and learn more of, I can get an insight on what he's thinking by learning the solo he does or something. And I feel like when you're first starting out, that's a good thing with praise and worship because you do learn a lot of really good foundational things like triads and basic melodies, following the vocals, all those sort of things. But then once you get to a certain level, let's say intermediate guitar player, you hit a wall and a lot of places don't let you go across that wall. And then you kind of start losing your own identity. And then you just become, a mini David Hislop or, whoever else you want to say. And then and then that's where you kind of getting into the people where they're kind of stagnant as players because that's just the environment they're in. And that's the only opportunity for them to play, right? They're not going out and playing gigs at festivals or whatever. They're playing Sunday morning, Saturday night for their church. So that's their only experience. So there's nowhere for them to go. They can put all this work into getting to be a better player, but they can't use that for anything. And so I think a lot of what happens is then they shift to gear. It's like, there's nowhere really for me to go with my skill level of like learning parts, whatever. It's like, I'm kind of already there. I want to get the next greatest sound that's going to be exactly what he played. I want to get his exact pedal. I want to buy his Big Sky presets, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it kind of leads into that cliche, which absolutely is there's obviously a truth behind it because that's usually what happens with those sort of things. There's a lot of people like that. And I think also, not to totally defend those people, but I think what people don't realize from the outside is these players, these people that you see with these boards that are associated with that, they have day jobs. They have, good paying jobs. I'm saying again, generalities here, not everyone, but a lot of the time they have a good paying job and being a musician is their side thing. It's a hobby to them. And so, as a musician, a real musician, like I don't consider myself a musician. I don't consider myself a musician for a couple reasons, but one of the reasons is that I've never had to rely on music or my guitar playing as any form of income. Like that's never been something that I've relied on. It's always been something I did on the side. And so, typically a real musician, unless you're playing giant stadiums or something, you're going to have a more meager setup. You're going to have to get really good at getting the most out of the gear you have.
Right.
Whereas you have people who are playing worship, and a lot of the times they're people who have a good, solid 9-to-5 day job. They live in have a comfortable living, and they have this side money that they can put towards stuff. And instead of a car, instead of adding an intake and exhaust or whatever to their car, they're buying the Strifecta or something like that. And
totally.
And then you have that, and those are kind of the people that I get the brunt of it. And I've certainly experienced that from people just and anecdotally for me is, I've got a lot of very nice guitars. I didn't get them all at once, whatever.
Yeah.
But I have a 9-to-5 job. I have a great job, and I don't, I've had the same first vehicle I ever owned when I got, when I was 16. I don't have any other car. It's been paid off 6 years ago, whatever. So I put my money into my guitars because it's what I enjoy. And I can afford to do that because I'm not relying on gigs, to be able to pay for it. So generally, I'm not into defending that stereotype. But just as a little aside to people that maybe are watching this that aren't in that world, that's a lot of it as well, I think.
Yeah, when I was young, I remember going to this. If there's any like people from the Bay Area watching, there's an old music store called Gelb Music in Redwood City, California. That shop has been there like forever, probably since the early '50s, and I think it got bought out now. But anyway, I went in there and they were the first shop that I ever saw like Sir guitars in, or they had Tom Anderson's, not even Sir yet. They had Tom Anderson's, and they had a bunch of Fender stuff, and they had amps I'd never heard of. They were carrying some boutique lines, and full tone pedals they had in there at the time when that was like one of the only boutique brands you could find. Them and who was the other one? Frantone. Remember Frantone? They fuzz it, dude. No. This is like Harmony Central days, like early, like Gear Page was small, anyway. But basically, they had a lot of really nice stuff. I'd go in there, and I remember looking at all the Les Pauls, and I said, man, who buys these? And the guy said to me, lawyers. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, lawyers. They wanted to be rock stars, and now they're lawyers. So they can buy $6,000 Jimmy Page signature Les Pauls. Those guys, the blues lawyer is 55 plus. And our generation's version of the blues lawyer is the Sunday morning insurance salesman, investment advisor who's 30 years old. He's young in his career. He's making good money. And he's got the Strifecta and a Veritas and whatever, you know what I mean, a Jackson amp. And all those are great pieces of gear. My only point is that's who it is now. It's someone with a nice 9-to-5, and they're not weekend warriors anymore in blues bands, in cover bands. Their gig is Sunday morning. And if you look at the landscape of America, at least is how it is in California, probably. Most of it, certainly in Northern California where I'm from. I imagine you guys still have, in the San Diego area where you are, you probably still have some live music venues kicking around. But you probably...
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore, right? But it now, I mean, we're in a situation where there's more live music on Sunday mornings than Friday nights.
Oh, wait, I would say way more.
Yeah. So
I mean,
players go where there's a place to play. So this is where the guitar is thriving. If those articles were true, the electric guitar is dying. It's certainly not dying in the Sunday morning world. It's never been bigger. And look, we were talking about those guys. I get it when someone's like, I just want to play this exactly. There's places who are trying to, maybe their music isn't that great, and they're all about challenging their people to just be excellent and be better. And the first place I ever played was kind of like that. And at some point, you, as a team, you shouldn't have to. You don't need to really direct people. You know what I mean? The culture out here where I am now in Nashville, man, if a pastor had an opinion about the worship music, it would be very strange, because he's probably talking to a bunch of people who make their living or have made their living at least at some point in their life from music, And I'll just tell you, on my worship team, which is not like a big church, probably like a church of like 400 people out here just in the suburbs where I live, of the other guitar players, one just, had been with Brooks and Dunn for years. He's been in stadiums forever. Doing the stuff. Another one's a professional producer who just plays guitar for us. Another guy's like a dude trying to do it, and then the other one's me. It's like the four of us, right? And then And then the drummers, same thing. Half of them, they leave for a while. Bass players, is like a guy with a 9 to 5, but he's a monster. Keyboard players, dudes we got 2 guys. One's a producer, one's like a killer gospel guy. You know what I mean? So there's different cultures, different places. What I find interesting is I can't imagine how anybody could tell someone you need to play what's on the record right now. And if they only have one guitar player, how are you supposed to achieve that? So I go in, and my style is I just always tell the drummer, because we always run tracks. We always run a click track. We always have tracks. And I always tell them, take out every guitar. And they go, every guitar? And I go, yeah. They go, there's 4 tracks of guitars. I go, exactly. Take out every single guitar. Because I've already thought of what I need to pull in and what I need to play. And to me, that's part of the fun. We're now playing live, and live is its own thing. We're not reproducing the record. I mean, this is how I look at it. We're covering this song. We're doing this song, but we want to do this song in this room, in this setting with these people. So my guitar tone's going to be a little bit different. If I'm playing with a gospel guy, he's on the keys, and guess what? He is going to lean more on the piano sounds and more on doubling melodies and stuff, less on the spacey, ethereal stuff, less on the ambient stuff. So that affects how I'm going to play, and that affects when I double him. If I'm going to double him on a melody, if I'm going to be more ambient or less ambient, or if I'm going to take the role of almost like a pad underneath a part he's playing, or what I'm going to do. But if I play with the other dude, he's not on the piano at all. He's all on the pads. He's doing all this stuff. Now I'm free to be less ambient. If there's 2 acoustic guitar players, I think it changes things. If there's a cello, sometimes we got the cello shows up, and I'm like, what are you doing? I got to figure out now what I'm going to do here. And that's part of the musicianship aspect of it. So I get that thing, like reproduce what's there, be excellent. Man, I get that. But at some point, we're musicians trying to play this music with this arrangement, and we don't have room for 7 overdubbed parts, which is in the music today. That's just in the music.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I moved to where I'm at now maybe a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. Before that, I didn't move that far, but I was maybe an hour away from where I'm at now. And so we obviously went to a different church then, and the church there was a lot more in the play the parts, like the parts. They did, depending on your skill level, they gave you a longer leash. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, he can play, so he can like do a little bit different, but generally the expectation, and again, it was with tracks and all that kind of stuff. So you kind of fit within the mold of it. And then I moved down here, and I'm by the beach. And so the whole attitude is very different here. It's completely different. And then I ended up going to a church so long story short, before I moved with my wife, we went church shopping, for lack of a better word. We went to a bunch of churches to try and find one that kind of we agreed with their theology and all that kind of stuff. And so we ended up finding a church, and then started going. Awesome. And lo and behold, the pastor is the dad of John Foreman and Tim Foreman of Switchfoot. Yeah. So he would be a pastor that could say something about music. And sure. But so I went there, and that church has an insane number of musicians that are all professionals, that have all done it, that have all done recordings. A lot of them have actually, 3 of them I know have moved to Nashville. Mm-hmm. A lot of them came from Nashville and moved over here. It was a whole different world. And it went from getting the songs 2 weeks in advance, having the planning center with the song adjusted in the key so you can practice with it exactly, to, okay, we're going to do this song, and we might go and do this song. We're probably going to do this song. And then, the morning of, you figure it out. And then the closing song, who knows, we'll figure it out right before we go out, kind of thing. Yeah. It was a whole totally different environment. And then it was nobody played the same parts. Nobody played the exact parts. And so for me, it was like a culture shock, because I was so used to spending all this time learning these parts, and it was immediately apparent to me how much that had brought down my skill level, because my ability to improv had kind of, it's a muscle. You have to work it out.
Absolutely.
And it hadn't been worked in so long. And so it was really fascinating to me. And then we would do, we had at my church, there's a Sunday night service. It's a big church. And the Sunday night service has an extended worship at the end of it. And they add 5 or 6 songs. And those songs aren't chosen until right before you go up, basically. Maybe an hour before. And then it just kind of goes with the moment. And who knows where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And it was so frustrating to me in the beginning, but it's incredible how much I've learned from it, how far I've come because of that. And I really have been able to kind of build my own voice and see what kind of player I am, and to kind of, what's my tone? What's my kind of parts I like to go for?
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting to me. And I see the people that are locked into that, like play the parts 1-to-1, just like the record. And I'm like, I was there, and I totally see that in the long run, there's so much not negativity, but it just doesn't, we don't have to get into too much of this, but we've all been given, we have these God-given skills, right? So we've been given these talents, these abilities, and we're using them to praise God at church. And so do you think that he wants you to, give 10% of your ability? Do you think he wants you to give he gave you the ability to be a creative person, and you have your own voice. So, but obviously there's nuance to it. You don't want somebody who's just going to be shredding,
Right.
arpeggios left and right. That doesn't fit
Yeah.
it. But, I think we all know what I'm talking
You
about.
you got to respect the music and respect the song.
Right. Yeah. So from my perspective, I see a lot of that, and I just go, man, I'm so glad I'm not in that anymore, because I feel like I've grown so far. Like I play right now, there's a couple different teams, and I've been with the quote unquote gospel team for the past, few months. And oh my goodness, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. All the different chord changes, the chromaticism. It's like, you're always on your toes. And it's been so great for me to be able to learn that. It's a completely different facet of, they probably would never consider praise and worship, but
right.
I mean, kind of is, but, but I think,
I had exactly the same experience when I moved here, and I was around a bunch of songwriters, and we were doing sometimes it was songs that I had heard of, and sometimes it was a song they wrote that week, and they would just show up and they'd call out the changes. They'd just call out the numbers, and then boom, it's time to play. What I ended up loving from that was that I ended up realizing when I first got there, they did a record real fast. And then I kind of got on the team, and then a couple of the guys dropped off. One of the guys went to keyboard. One of the guys got busy, and then I ended up as me and this other dude as like the main guitar players. And I was a little more experienced than him. And what I realized that meant was every new song was an opportunity to write the parts, as we did it live. And then when it came time to do the record, we had a bunch of parts, and it was, you could write other stuff now that you're hearing it in a different context. But it was an incredible education, in just being able to play songs you don't know and that you never heard before before you played it. But it makes you grow. I mean, the first week they were calling out numbers, and I knew how the numbers worked, but I didn't use them. So they would just, then I had to go home, do my homework, brush up, and be able for them to just call out a key, call out some numbers, and just follow them, and what was really intimidating was when I got there, they would have done a demo sometimes, and they'd pass the phone around, and the bass player would just listen, and then he'd put it down and play the song, right? And then I just learned, well, they're not actually listening for tonality, they're just listening for the changes. Like once they hear the song, they're just listening to what it is, and you can hear a fifth and a fourth and that's probably all it is. There's a sixth, and then you're lucky if a third or a second comes up. That's you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's an education
for sure. Yeah, it's I've never learned more just being put in the moment, going, okay, I feel like we're gonna go and do this song. Never heard the song in my life. Mm-hmm. I just got to come up with stuff, but it's great. Let's do a couple of quick hitting, because I was we waxed on a little bit there. Let's do a couple quick hitting questions for praise and worship real quick.
You can
So,
cut this down to whatever you think it's gonna, be.
but what I might end up doing is I might end up splitting it into parts. I'm not sure yet, but
Sure,
anyways.
sure.
So music stands on stage, yes or no?
No stands on stage, but I like music on stage. So get an iPad or just write your numbers out. I do this sometimes for songs that are I can't always remember. I try to just memorize all songs, but I'm always the guy who has 2 or 3 sheets of paper in front of my board, just on the ground, just for reference in case I forget.
Yeah, I do a similar thing. So you already said that you would not. I'm just going through a couple things I wanted to ask you.
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it, but I just think I just think put it on the ground. It looks you could stare at your shoes and look cool. You know what I mean? You don't need to stare at the. We don't need to